My son and daughter kicked me out, telling me to find my own place so they could sell the family home. They had no idea I already had my own place, a $100 million tower I built in secret, and they were the ones who were about to be left with nothing. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. I sat on my grandmother's wingback chair, my hands folded in my lap, and I waited. The formal living room in my own home felt cold, like a museum. It was a room we never used, and today it felt like a courtroom. I was about to hear the prosecution's opening statement. My children, my two greatest works and my most profound failures stood side by side, a united front. Sam, my son, 49, and already weary of a life he felt had cheated him, was the designated spokesman. Lena, my daughter, 46 and sharp as broken glass, was the strategist. I could see her ambition, her cold, hard resolve in her brother's eyes. "Mom," Sam began, his voice too loud, too formal. "We love you. You know that. We are so grateful for everything you've done for us, for letting us live here, for helping with the kids." The words were a hollow, meaningless preamble. I felt my pulse, a slow, heavy beat against my ribs. I knew, as a general knows the terrain of a battlefield, exactly where this was headed. "But," he said, and there it was, the pivot, the word upon which our family was about to break. "It's time for a change. We're not kids anymore, Ma. We're adults. And this house, it's just not working for us anymore." "It's an underperforming asset, Mother," Lena cut in. Her voice was a sharp, clinical instrument. The cold corporate jargon was an ugly sound in the soft evening air, a jarring note in a room filled with a century of family history. "This neighborhood is exploding. The property values are astronomical. We're just sitting on a gold mine." "We are living in it, Lena," I corrected her gently, my voice quiet. "It's a dead end, Ma," Sam mumbled, nodding agreement, refusing to meet my eyes. "We're trapped here, running that greasy spoon, while the whole world passes us by." A greasy spoon. That was my mother's legacy, my life's work. The place that had put both of them through private college, paid for their expensive weddings, and was still, in its quiet, unassuming way, funding their comfortable, ungrateful lives. The silence that followed their declaration was a living, breathing thing. It was filled with the ghosts of 50 years of my own sacrifice. In that one terrible, suspended moment, my entire life seemed to flash before my eyes. Not as a series of happy memories, but as a long, detailed, and deeply unbalanced ledger of my own giving. I saw myself at 22, putting my own dreams of college on hold to take over the family restaurant after my mother's sudden death, so my own younger siblings could finish their schooling. I saw myself at 30, a new mother, working 18-hour days in the hot, relentless chaos of the kitchen, my body aching with a fatigue so profound it was a physical pain, so that my two children, my beautiful Sam and Lena, could have the private education I never had. I saw myself in this very house, in the middle of the night, walking the worn floorboards of this living room for hours, holding a colicky, screaming baby Lena, so my husband could get his rest before his long shift. I saw myself at this kitchen table, patiently helping a frustrated teenage Sam with his algebra, a subject I despised, but one he needed to pass. I saw myself selling my own mother's jewelry, a precious, irreplaceable heirloom, to fund the down payment for Lena's first disastrous marriage to a man I knew was no good for her. Because my daughter had been in love, and her happiness at that moment was more important to me than my own history. I saw myself just 10 years ago, after their own marriages had crumbled, turning this beautiful brownstone not into my quiet, peaceful sanctuary of retirement, but into a noisy, chaotic, and loving daycare center. I had put my life on hold again to raise a second generation, to give their children the stability their own self-absorbed parents were too busy to provide. 50 years, half a century of putting everyone else first. And my reward was this: a quiet, polite, and deeply cruel eviction notice. Sam took a deep, shaky breath, the coward steeling himself for the killing blow. Lena and we've decided that it's time for us to take over the house, and for you to find your own place. A smaller place, something more manageable, for a woman of your age. The condescension was a physical thing, a slimy, unwelcome touch. Lena stepped forward. She was the closer. Her voice was not emotional. It was the calm, rational, and utterly merciless voice of a woman who has already won. We think it's for the best, Mother. You've spent your entire life supporting everyone else. It's time for you to think about yourself, to downsize, to simplify. She slid something across the polished mahogany table. It was a glossy brochure, bright and cheerful. The cover read Silver Pines, with a picture of smiling seniors playing shuffleboard. Then her eyes, for the first time, met mine. They were as cold and as hard as river stones. The truth is, she said, her voice a cool, silken thing, you need to find your own place. We don't fit together here anymore. The words were a quiet, elegant, and deeply effective assassination. I was no longer the matriarch. I was no longer the foundation. I was just in the way. An old, inconvenient piece of furniture, cluttering up their beautiful, ambitious new lives. The pain was not a sharp, hot thing. It was a cold, quiet, and deeply profound agony. They did not see my sacrifices as gifts. They saw them as their due. They did not see my love as a foundation. They saw it as a cage. I looked at their faces, my son's, a mask of weak, guilty resolve. My daughter's, a picture of cool, impatient, and utterly unapologetic ambition. And I saw them for what they were. Not my children. Not anymore. They were strangers. Two greedy, ungrateful strangers standing in my house, the house my sweat and sacrifice had maintained, and they were politely but firmly showing me the door. In that moment, in my grandmother's chair, I felt a wave of pure, white-hot, and deeply liberating rage. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them about the sacrifices, about the long nights, about the secret, parallel life I had been living for 50 years, while they had been blissfully, ignorantly living off the fruits of it. I wanted to unleash the full, terrible, and glorious truth of my own power upon them. But I did not. An emotional outburst would be a mistake. It would give them exactly what they wanted: a hysterical, emotional, and, in their eyes, slightly senile old woman, proving their point that she was no longer fit to manage her own affairs. It would be a strategic blunder. So I did the opposite. I took all of my rage, all of my grief, all of my profound and deeply satisfying secret knowledge, and I packed it away. I locked it in a cold, dark, and utterly impenetrable vault, deep in the center of my soul. The woman who looked up at her two triumphant, predatory children was someone else entirely. She was a picture of weary, heartbroken, and deeply defeated resignation. I let out a long, slow, and deeply theatrical sigh. It was a masterpiece of maternal martyrdom. If that's what you think is best, I said, and my voice was a small, frail, and slightly trembling thing. I did not have to fake the tears that welled in my eyes. The grief for the children I had lost was a real and deeply useful thing. The relief on their faces was a disgusting and deeply illuminating thing. It was so profound, so absolute. It was almost comical. They had been prepared for a fight, for a messy, emotional, guilt-ridden battle. They had not been prepared for my immediate and total surrender. "Oh, Mom, we knew you'd understand," Sam said, his voice flooding with a grateful and deeply patronizing relief. He rushed forward and knelt by my chair, taking my hand. His touch was a repulsive, unwelcome thing, but I let him hold it. "This is for the best, Mother," Lena said, her own voice losing its hard corporate edge, taking on a tone of soothing, gentle condescension. "You'll see. We'll help you find a lovely little apartment. Something new and clean and easy to manage. You won't have to worry about a thing." They were so happy. They had won. They had successfully, and with a surprising, almost disappointing ease, deposed the old queen. They were now the undisputed rulers of their new kingdom. I'm just very tired," I whispered, my voice a perfect quavering instrument of elderly frailty. I pulled my hand from my son's grasp. I think I need to go back to my apartment. I need to rest and to think." "Of course, Mom," Sam said, all loving, solicitous concern now that he had gotten what he wanted. "Let me walk you out." He helped me from my chair, his hand on my elbow as if I were a fragile porcelain doll. I played the part to perfection. I leaned on him just a little. I let my steps be slow and slightly shuffling. I walked out of my own living room, out of my own home, a defeated, broken, and utterly fraudulent old woman. As I reached the front door, it opened, and Lena's husband, Mark, walked in. Mark was a lobbyist, a man who moved in the quiet, powerful circles of the capital, smelling of expensive cigars and backroom deals. He saw my face, my trembling hand on Sam's arm. "Martha?" he asked, his sharp eyes taking in the scene. "Are you all right? You look pale." I flinched, genuinely this time. I hadn't prepared for another audience. Just tired, Mark. Your wife and Sam, they've been very helpful." Lena smiled, a tight, managerial smile. "We're just helping Mom plan her next steps, darling. It's time for her to have a real retirement." Mark looked from me to Lena, a flicker of something I couldn't read, calculation, perhaps, in his eyes. He put a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Well, that's wonderful. You deserve it, Martha. You've earned it." I nodded, my eyes downcast, my shoulders slumped. I shuffled past him, out the door, and into the cooling night air. They watched me go, their faces full of a mixture of pity and a deep, profound, and deeply satisfying relief. The obstacle had been removed. The future was theirs. They had no idea. They had not just won a small domestic skirmish. They had, with their own greedy and deeply foolish hands, just declared a war. A war they were not prepared for. A war they were about to lose in the most spectacular and most public way imaginable. The moment the heavy oak door of the brownstone clicked shut behind me, the frail, defeated, and heartbroken old woman vanished. The woman who walked down the front steps and onto the quiet tree-lined street was someone else entirely. She simply evaporated, a theatrical ghost leaving the stage. My back was straight. My steps were firm and purposeful. My eyes, which had been full of a watery geriatric sadness just moments before, were now as clear, as cold, and as hard as a winter sky. I did not go back to my small, simple apartment over the restaurant. Not yet. I walked the 2 blocks to a small, quiet park, a place of old oak trees and forgotten Civil War monuments. The air was cool and carried the scent of jasmine from a nearby garden. I sat on a familiar wrought iron bench, the metal cold against my legs, and I took out my phone. It was not the cheap, pay-as-you-go flip phone my children believed I used. This was a sleek, modern, and deeply encrypted smartphone. The first part of my plan, the strategic retreat, was complete. It was now time to mobilize my own secret and infinitely more powerful army. I had only one soldier in that army, but he was all I needed. I dialed the private number of Mr. Augustin Cole, my wealth manager, my co-conspirator, my oldest and most loyal friend. He had been a scholarship boy at the university with me, a brilliant, hungry kid from the wrong side of the tracks who had, like me, built an empire from scratch. He was the only person in the world who knew the full, staggering, and deeply satisfying truth of my 50-year double life. He answered on the first ring. His voice was the calm, deep, and utterly unflappable baritone of a man who is accustomed to moving mountains. "Martha?" He did not ask if I was all right. He knew this call was not a social one. He knew this was the call he had been waiting for, with a grim, patient loyalty, for years. "Augustine," I said, my own voice a thing of pure, cold, and utterly unshakable resolve. "It's time." There was a pause on the other end of the line, then a low, slow, and deeply satisfied sound. The sound of a man who was about to enjoy a moment of long overdue righteous justice. He chuckled. "They finally did it, didn't they?" he said. "The little fools. They finally pushed you too far." "They did," I said. In a few clipped, unemotional sentences, I told him everything: the family meeting, the Silver Pines brochure, the demand that I move out, the quiet, brutal, and deeply satisfying lie of my surrender. He listened, his silence a deep and appreciative thing. He was not just a numbers man, he was a strategist. He appreciated the elegance of a well-executed plan. "So," he said when I was finished, "the brownstone. You're ready." "I am," I said. "Put it on the market immediately, but not the public market. A private off-market sale. I want it done quickly, I want it done quietly, and I want it done for a price that will make their heads spin. You will find a corporate anonymous buyer, a holding company. No names, no personal connection to me. I want the sale to be a mystery, a ghost. Consider it done," he said, his voice humming with a quiet professional joy. "I have a list of international investors who would kill for a property like that. It will be sold by the end of the week." "Good," I said. "And the other thing, the new residence." "It's ready, Martha," he said, and his voice was now full of a warm, genuine, and deeply proud affection. "It's been ready for a year. The penthouse is finished. The staff is on standby. All you have to do is say the word." I looked up through the branches of the old oak trees, past the familiar silhouette of the university, toward the glittering new money skyline of downtown, and I saw it in my mind's eye. My secret, my masterpiece. The tallest, most beautiful, and most expensive new building in the entire city. The building I had secretly, quietly, and very, very profitably built. The Summit Tower. "The word is now, Augustine," I said, my voice a quiet, final, and deeply satisfying whisper. "It's time for me to go home." My secret life began, as most important things do, with a quiet, simple, and deeply pragmatic decision. It was 1975. The restaurant, which I had inherited from my mother, was doing well. A modest but steady success. But I was a young widow with 2 small children, and I was terrified. I was terrified of a sudden illness, of a bad economy, of a world that was not, and has never been, particularly kind to a single black working mother. I knew with a certainty that was born of a deep ancestral fear that I could not rely on a single source of income. I could not put all of my faith and all of my family's future in a business that was as fickle as the city's changing tastes. I needed a second front. I needed a fortress. So I started to buy property. It was not a glamorous enterprise. It was the opposite of glamorous. I did not buy fancy buildings in fashionable neighborhoods. I bought the junk. I bought the small, forgotten, and deeply unloved pieces of the capital that no one else wanted. A boarded-up row house in a bad neighborhood. A small derelict commercial building with a leaky roof. a vacant, weed-choked lot next to a noisy overpass. I bought them with the small, steady profits from the kitchen, the money that I should have been using to buy a nicer car or a bigger house or the private school education my children would later demand. I used it to buy dirt. I used it to buy bricks and mortar. And I learned. I spent my nights not in front of a television, but at the public library, poring over zoning maps and city planning documents. I learned how to read a neighborhood, how to see not what it was, but what it could become. I learned that a new metro line, a new government building, a new school could, in the space of a few years, turn a bad neighborhood into a transitional one, and a transitional one into a desirable one. I remember one night in 1978. I was at a city auction for seized properties. The room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I was the only woman, and certainly the only Black woman there. The auctioneer called a lot, a tiny triangular piece of land trapped between a rail yard and a warehouse. Useless. $500, I called out. A man in a cheap suit 2 rows ahead laughed. What's she gonna do, plant a garden? 600, I said, my voice steady. I had seen the city's 20-year plan. I knew that useless rail yard was the proposed site for a new cross-city connector. I got it for $750. I paid for it with the money I had saved for a new stove for the restaurant. 20 years later, I sold that useless lot to a hotel developer for $4.2 million. My one true and deeply secret advantage was my restaurant. The kitchen was the unofficial town hall of Black D.C. It was where the city council members, the urban planners, the union bosses, the quiet, powerful men and women who really ran this city came to eat. And they talked. And I, the quiet, smiling woman who was just refilling their coffee cups, I listened. I remember in 1992, Councilman Davies was in his usual booth, complaining to his aide over a plate of my ribs. This whole Navy Yard annexation is a nightmare, he'd grumbled, but the mayor is pushing it. He wants the new federal building there by 95. The next day, I had Augustin quietly buy 3 derelict warehouses on the block adjoining the proposed site. I was the most well-informed and the most invisible real estate investor in the entire city. Augustin Cole, who was then a brilliant, young, and deeply ambitious financial planner, was the one who helped me turn my small patchwork collection of ugly duckling properties into a real and very powerful swan. He helped me set up the holding companies, the layers of corporate anonymity, the offshore accounts that would allow me to build my empire in the shadows. For 50 years, I lived a double life. By day, I was Martha, the friendly, hard-working owner of a beloved soul food restaurant. A woman of simple means and even simpler tastes. By night, I was the silent, invisible, and deeply, deeply wealthy head of a real estate empire that was quietly but inexorably devouring the city. My children saw none of it. They saw the woman who came home smelling of fried chicken and collard greens. They saw the woman who drove a 10-year-old Buick. They saw the mother who always seemed to be pinching pennies. And they were ashamed of it. They had no idea that their mother, their simple, embarrassing, and, in their eyes, broke mother, was in fact the anonymous and deeply mysterious developer who was changing the very skyline of the city they lived in. My final, greatest project, the culmination of a lifetime of secret, patient work, was the Summit Tower, a soaring $100 million skyscraper of black glass and steel, the newest, most luxurious, and most talked about building in all of D.C. A building I had designed, I had financed, and I now, through a series of anonymous, untraceable corporations, owned. Lock, stock, and barrel. And at the very top of that tower, a 3-story, glass-walled palace in the sky, was my new home. The penthouse. The place I had built for myself. My fortress. My final, beautiful, and deeply satisfying declaration of a life they had never even known I was living. I closed the encrypted app on my phone. Augustine would handle the sale. He would handle the transfer of my assets. All I had to do was continue to play the part of the defeated old woman. I stood up from the bench, letting the frailty settle back into my shoulders. I shuffled back to my small apartment above the kitchen. My children thought they were planning my retirement. They had no idea they were, in fact, planning their own eviction. While I was quietly orchestrating the sale of their home and the preparation of my own, my children were engaged in their own deeply predictable celebration. They believed they had won. They had finally, after years of quiet, resentful struggle, successfully deposed the stubborn old matriarch. Their victory, in their own self-serving narrative, was not an act of greed. It was an act of responsible, forward-thinking love. A text message lit up my phone. It was from Lena. "Mom, just checking in. Hope you're resting. We're having a few friends over at the house tonight to organize. You should really just take it easy. We'll call you tomorrow about Silver Pines. Organize. A celebration." I knew this because Lena's best friend, a woman with a tongue as sharp as her designer heels, had already called one of my own old friends to give a full, gloating, and deeply detailed account of the impromptu party. "Lena is just so relieved," she had apparently said over cocktails. "Her mother is a sweet woman, of course, but she was just rattling around in that big old house. It was becoming a real burden. This is so much better for everyone." They had spent the evening making plans, grand, expensive plans, for the money they were sure would be coming their way the moment the house was sold. Lena, I was told, had her architect already on site, planning a gut renovation. "We're blowing out this wall," she declared, "getting rid of all this old, dusty junk, my grandmother's furniture, and this will be the new headquarters for my political consultancy firm." Sam had his own equally grandiose dreams. "I'm done with that greasy spoon," he had declared. "I'm partnering with that celebrity chef, the one from that TV show. We're opening a sleek, modern place at the wharf. Something with a marketing budget. Something that will finally get me the respect I'm owed." They were spending my money, the money from the sale, my house. They were decorating their new lives with the proceeds of my defeat. The next day, a knock came at the door of my small apartment above the restaurant. My heart seized for a moment. I wasn't ready for another confrontation. It was Mark, Lena's husband. He was holding a briefcase and wearing an expensive suit that looked out of place in my simple hallway. "Martha," he said, his voice smooth and concerned, "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I was at a meeting nearby, and, well, I'm worried about you." I leaned against the doorframe, pulling my old cardigan tighter. I played the part. "Oh, Mark, that's kind of you. I'm just resting. It's all been a bit of a shock." "I'll bet," he said, his eyes scanning my small apartment, taking in the worn sofa, the tiny kitchenette. I could see the pity, the faint disgust. "Look, Martha, I'm worried about Lena. She's ambitious. This plan to sell, it's moving very fast. I want to make sure you're protected." He stepped a little closer. "I know you have Augustine Cole, but well, he's from your world, the restaurant world. This is a multi-million-dollar real estate transaction. Let my legal team look over whatever he draws up. Just to be safe. No charge, of course. Just family helping family." My blood ran cold. He wasn't an ally. He was running reconnaissance for Lena. He wanted access. He wanted to see the numbers. He wanted to get his hands on the process. I had to risk his trust to keep my secret. "Oh, Mark," I said, my voice trembling just enough. "That's so very kind, truly. But Augustine, He's handled my little affairs for years. My will, the restaurant. I wouldn't want to bother your important lawyers. He he knows my ways. I I trust him. A flash of annoyance crossed his face. It was there and gone in a second, replaced by his smooth, concerned mask. He had wanted in. He had been denied. Of course, Martha, he said, patting my arm. Of course. The offer stands if you change your mind. You take care of yourself. Lena and Sam are only thinking of what's best for you. He smiled, but his eyes were cold. Just trying to help. I watched him walk down the stairs. I knew right then he wasn't just a guest at their party. He was a co-conspirator. They weren't just taking the house. They were making sure I had no power to fight back. I closed my door, my hand steady. I went to my phone and sent a new text to Augustine. Augustine, the son-in-law just paid me a visit. He's fishing. I need you to accelerate the timeline. I don't want a 72-hour close. I want it done in 48. A minute later, his reply came. Zurich is in a different time zone, Martha. They'll be thrilled to wake up to good news. Consider it done. The phone rang 2 days later. It was Lena, her voice dripping with a bright, patronizing, and deeply false concern. Mother, she chirped, I'm so glad I caught you. Sam and I have been doing some research, and we found the most wonderful new retirement community for you out in the suburbs. It's called Silver Pines. I held the phone away from my ear, my eyes closed. It's brand new, she continued, and they have lovely little one-bedroom apartments. So clean. And they have a shuttle bus that takes the residents to the mall once a week. We can go and look at it on Saturday if you like. I've already booked a tour. Silver Pines, a shuttle bus to the mall. This was the future they envisioned for me. A small, clean, and deeply beige box where I could live out the last quiet and deeply irrelevant years of my life. This was their generous reward for my 50 years of sacrifice. That's very thoughtful of you, dear, I said, my own voice a masterpiece of grateful elderly humility. But don't you worry about me. I have my own plans. Of course you do, she said with a small, indulgent laugh. The laugh of a daughter who is absolutely certain that her mother's plans are of no real consequence to anyone. Well, you just let us know if you need any help with the packing. Saturday, 10 a.m. Don't forget. She hung up before I could reply. Oh, I thought to myself as I hung up the phone. You will all be helping with the packing. You just don't know it yet. But they weren't finished. Their campaign of concern was just beginning. They weren't just trying to move me out. They were trying to build a public case that I was incapable of living on my own. That Sunday, I went to my church, the church my grandmother had helped found, the church where my children were baptized. I had been coming here for 60 years. After the service, as I was greeting my friends, Pastor Brown pulled me aside. He was a good man, but a man who was easily swayed by the appearance of success. Lena and Mark, with their expensive suits and their large donations, were very successful. Sister Martha, he said, his face a mask of deep pastoral concern. A moment. He led me to his office. Martha, Lena and Sam stopped by to see me this week. My blood chilled. They are so worried about you, my dear, he said, taking my hand. Deeply worried. They told me about your situation. Living all alone above the restaurant. The stress of it all. It's a lot for a woman of your... Well, it's a lot. He beamed at me. They told me their wonderful plan. To sell that big, drafty old house and find you a nice, safe community. A place where you can be looked after. Martha, it sounds like a blessing. A time for you to finally rest. The Lord wants us to accept the help our children offer. This was their move. They were poisoning the well. They were using my community, my friends, my pastor, to apply pressure, to frame me as the stubborn, confused old woman, and them as the loving, dutiful children. It was a social execution. My jaw locked. I felt the heat rise in my chest. This was a public humiliation, wrapped in the language of God. I pulled my hand from his. It was a risk, a small social rebellion. But I would not be managed, not here. Pastor, I said, my voice quiet but no longer frail, I appreciate your concern, and theirs. But my affairs and my relationship with my God are my own. You'll have to excuse me. I turned and walked out of his office, right past Lena and Sam, who were waiting in the fellowship hall, their faces masks of loving concern for all the congregation to see. I saw Lena's smile falter as I walked past them without a word. The whispers started as I walked out the door. The choir members, my friends of 40 years, their eyes full of pity and confusion. I was the difficult one. I was the one making a scene. I had just paid the first visible price. I had just risked my reputation, my standing in the community I had loved my whole life. I got into my old Buick, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. This was no longer just about a house. It was about my life, my legacy, my name. And they had just made a very, very big mistake. They had lit a fire. The text from Augustin came on Monday morning, just as I was prepping the kitchen for the lunch rush. It was a simple, encrypted message on my private phone. Zurich is in. 48-hour close. Cash. 30% over ask. They are wiring now. The entity is Rutledge Avenue Historical Preservation Trust, LLC. Anonymous. Based in Delaware. I suggest you pack, Martha. The penthouse is ready. I read the text, my heart hammering a sudden triumphant beat. It was done. I sent a reply. Handle the transfer to the new trust. Not a penny is to be touched. And Augustin. Thank you. His reply was instant. Justice is its own reward, my friend. The final wire transfer confirmation will arrive today. But orchestrating the sale was one thing. Receiving the money was another. This was the part I dreaded. I had to go to the bank. My real bank. Not the small local branch where I deposited the restaurant's cash, but the private wealth division of a major international bank, where Martha Jennings was not a sweet old lady who owned a diner, but a high-value client. I had to maintain my cover, even here. I went to the main branch, dressed in my usual restaurant owner clothes. I deposited the weekend's cash, just like any other Monday. As I was leaving, the branch manager, Ms. Evans, a sharp woman I'd known for years, discreetly caught my eye. Mrs. Jennings? Could you spare a moment? In my office? My stomach tightened. I followed her into the glass-walled office. She closed the door. Martha, she said, her voice low. An unusual wire transfer is pending. It's substantial. She looked at me over her glasses. It's from a bank in Zurich. The amount is, it's flagged by our system. We need to confirm that you are expecting this. This was it. The moment my two worlds could collide. My cover could be blown right here in this local branch. I reached into my simple purse. I didn't pull out my wallet. I pulled out a single, heavy, cream-colored business card. It didn't say Martha's Kitchen. It didn't even have my name on it. It had a single phone number. I slid it across the desk. Call this number, Miss Evans, I said, my voice quiet and calm. Ask for Mr. Augustin Cole. He will verify the holding company's transaction on my behalf. Ms. Evans looked at the card, then at me. Her eyes widened. She knew who Augustin Cole's firm was. They didn't represent diner owners. They represented billionaires and foreign governments. The power in the room flipped. She picked up her phone, her hand trembling slightly. She dialed. Yes, this is Ms. Evans at... Yes. I'm calling to verify a pending inward wire for a client. Yes. The Rutledge Trust. Yes. I see. Her face paled. She listened for another 30 seconds, her eyes fixed on me. But she wasn't seeing the old lady in the cardigan anymore. She was seeing someone else entirely. Yes, she whispered. I understand completely. My apologies. It will be processed immediately. Thank you, Mr. Cole. She hung up the phone. She stood up. My apologies, Miss Jennings, she said, her voice now deeply formal. There will be no further holds on your account. Will there be anything else? No, thank you, Miss Evans, I said, rising. I took my business card back and slid it into my purse. That will be all. I walked out of the bank. The money was now sitting in a secure, inaccessible trust account, an account to which only Augustine and I held the keys. The first phase of my plan was complete. The asset had been liquidated. The trap was now loaded. All that was left was for the unsuspecting targets to wander into it. And I knew, with a quiet, grim certainty, that they would do so with a blind, arrogant, and deeply satisfying confidence. The official-looking envelope arrived at the brownstone on a rainy Wednesday morning, a week after the secret, spectral sale had been finalized. It was delivered not by the regular mailman, but by a professional, uniformed courier, a fact that in itself lent it an air of grave legal importance. Lena was the one who found it. It had been slipped through the mail slot of the front door, and it was lying on the antique heart pine floor of the foyer. A stark, cream-colored rectangle of impending doom. She picked it up. The envelope was thick, heavy, watermarked. It was addressed not to her, not to her brother, but to current occupants. The return address was not a local law firm. It was a corporate P.O. box in Wilmington, Delaware, the anonymous heartland of American shell corporations. Her first reaction was annoyance. It was probably just junk mail. Some aggressive new security company trying to sell them a system for the house they now considered theirs. She almost tossed it into the recycling bin, but some small, nagging flicker of curiosity, or perhaps just a premonition of the coming storm, made her open it. The document inside was not an advertisement. It was a formal and deeply official legal notice. It began, "To the current unauthorized occupants of the property located at 125 Elm Drive." It was full of the cold, merciless language of the law. Cease and desist. Unlawful detainer. Premises. And it ended with a single, brutal, and utterly incomprehensible sentence. You are hereby given 30 days from the date of this notice to vacate the premises. It was signed not by a person, but by a sterile, corporate entity. The Rutledge Avenue Historical Preservation Trust, LLC. Lena read it once. She read it a second time, and then a third. The words did not change. The meaning did not soften. It was an eviction notice, a formal, legal, and utterly insane declaration that they were being thrown out of their own home. Her initial shock quickly morphed into a hot, indignant fury. This was, of course, a mistake, a ridiculous bureaucratic screw-up, or more likely, it was her mother, her simple, slightly senile, and deeply disorganized mother, who had clearly, in her own bumbling way, messed up the paperwork for the transfer of the deed. She called Sam immediately, her voice a sharp, angry buzzsaw of frustration. "You will not believe what your mother has done now," she shrieked into the phone. Their annoyance, at this stage, was not directed at the anonymous corporation that had just legally evicted them. It was directed entirely and completely at me. They saw this not as a threat, but as an inconvenience, a messy, embarrassing, and deeply typical piece of incompetence from their dear old and increasingly burdensome mother, who couldn't even be trusted to handle a simple real estate transaction correctly. My phone rang, It was Sam. His voice was a masterpiece of strained, patronizing patience. "Mom," he said, as if speaking to a particularly slow and difficult child. "There seems to be some kind of mix-up with the paperwork for the house. We got a strange letter today from some LLC." "A letter, dear?" I asked, my voice full of flustered confusion. "Oh, my." "Yeah, Mom," he sighed, the sound of a deeply put-upon man. "It's some crazy legal thing. An eviction notice. Can you believe it? You need to call your lawyer, Mom. You need to get this straightened out. We have decorators scheduled to come in next week." "Oh, dear," I said, my voice a perfect instrument of elderly confusion. "An eviction? Oh, that just can't be right. A mix-up. I am so sorry, darlings. I will have Augustine look into it right away. Don't you worry your pretty little heads about a thing." "Yeah, well, get him on it. Today," Sam ordered and hung up. I hung up my own phone. A slow, cold, and deeply satisfying smile spread across my face. Oh, they had decorators coming. That was lovely. It was a shame they would have to meet them on the sidewalk. My private phone buzzed. A text from Augustine. "They haven't called me yet, but they will." I texted back, "They're calling you now. Be the wall." Sam and Lena, of course, did not wait for me. They called Augustine's office directly. He, as instructed, was a perfect impenetrable wall of polite professional obfuscation. "Yes, Mr. Jennings, I'm aware of the situation," I heard him say later, when Sam called me back, frantic, and put me on speakerphone with Augustine's office. "Your mother has asked me to handle it. I can assure you, we are looking into the matter." "What matter?" Lena shrieked into the phone. "Who is this LLC? Did my mother sell the house?" "I am not at liberty to discuss the private details of my client's estate planning, Miss Carter," Augustine's voice replied, smooth as glass. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have another call. I will be in touch when there is an update." He hung up. "He hung up on me!" Lena screamed. "He's stonewalling us!" "Mom, what is going on?" Sam yelled. "What did you do?" "Oh, dear," I whispered, my voice trembling. I don't understand. Augustine. He handles everything. I'm sure it's just a mistake." "A mistake?" Lena's voice was sharp, a weapon. "This doesn't feel like a mistake." "Mark!" she yelled away from the phone. "I need you to find out who owns the Rutledge Avenue Historical Preservation Trust, LLC. Now." The next 2 weeks were a slow, agonizing descent into a new and deeply unfamiliar reality for my two children. The initial arrogant annoyance that this was all just a simple maternal screw-up began to curdle into a real and deeply unsettling panic. A few days later, a text message arrived. It was from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a screenshot of a text exchange. Augustine had forwarded it to me. It was from Mark, Lena's husband, to Lena. It's a ghost. Delaware Shell forwards to a P.O. box, which forwards to a corporate services firm in Zurich. It's untraceable. Lena. This is not a mistake. The sale is real. I checked the city land registry. The house was sold. It's done. You don't own it. The panic began to escalate. Their own lawyers, the ones they had on retainer for their own, much smaller business dealings, were equally useless. "The sale is legally airtight," their lawyer told them, in a meeting I later heard about from a fuming Lena. "The property was in your mother's name, free and clear. She had every legal right to sell it. And she did. The new anonymous corporate owner is a ghost. There is no one to call, no one to negotiate with. There is only the stark, legal, and rapidly approaching deadline of your own eviction. You have 12 days. And then the second phase of the demolition began. Their own carefully curated lives, which they had been funding with the blithe, confident assumption of their impending inheritance, began to unravel. It happened to Lena first. She was in a high-end boutique at the wharf, a place where she had an account. She was buying a ridiculously expensive handbag, a small celebratory gift to herself for handling me so successfully. She handed the cashier her Platinum American Express card. The cashier, a young woman with purple hair, swiped it and swiped it again. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the cashier said, her voice polite. "This card has been rejected." "What?" Lena snapped. "That's impossible. Run it again." "I did," the cashier said, her voice cooler now. "It's declined." The store went silent. The other wealthy patrons turned to look. Lena's face, I was told by her friend, who was with her, turned a shade of crimson. "This is ridiculous," Lena hissed, fumbling for another card, a debit card. "Declined," the cashier said, not even looking at her. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the cashier said, louder this time. "This card has been rejected." The public, deeply humiliating moment had almost sent her into a full-blown hysterical rage. She had to leave the store, empty-handed. It turned out the massive credit line on her cards was not secured by her husband's lobbying income. It was secured by a letter of credit tied to my assets, an arrangement I had set up years ago to help her launch her life. An arrangement I had quietly canceled the day Augustine's wire transfer cleared. Sam's turn came 2 days later. He had his big meeting with the celebrity chef and a group of investors for his new visionary restaurant. He was using his expected inheritance as collateral for his share of the loan. The loan officer, a man who had been fawning over him just a month before, was cold and distant. "Sam," the loan officer said, not making eye contact, "we're going to have to pause your application." "Pause?" Sam said, his voice cracking. "What do you mean, pause? The investors are ready." "Sam, off the record," the loan officer said, leaning in. "The bank's risk assessment algorithms flagged the family name. The brownstone. It's been sold. Without that house as collateral, Sam, there's no loan. Your line of credit is frozen, effective immediately." The life they had known, a life of easy credit, and the powerful reassuring weight of the Jennings family name was evaporating. They were starting to feel the first terrifying chill of a world without a safety net. That night, they stormed the kitchen. It was the middle of the dinner rush. The restaurant was full, smelling of yeast rolls and fried chicken. I was at the front register. The door slammed open. It was Sam and Lena. Their faces were pale and furious. "Mother," Lena hissed, walking straight up to me, her voice a low, vicious whisper. "We need to talk. Now." "Lena, dear," I said, my voice full of concern for all my customers to hear. "What's wrong? You look awful." "What's wrong?" she seethed. "My cards are declined. Sam's loan was denied. The bank knows the house is sold. Did you sell the house and just keep the money?" The restaurant was getting quiet. People were staring. "Money, dear?" I asked, my heart hammering. This was the performance of my life. I don't understand." "Don't play dumb with us," Sam snarled, stepping forward. "What did you do with our inheritance?" I put my hand to my chest. I let my eyes fill with tears, and I did something I had never done in 40 years of service. I dropped a plate. It shattered on the floor. Crash. The entire restaurant went silent. "Oh," I gasped, my voice breaking. "Oh, my dears. Money? You're scaring me. I don't, Augustine. He just handles." My loyal cook, James, a man who had worked for me for 30 years, stepped out of the kitchen. "Ma'am, is there a problem here?" Lena and Sam looked at me, then at the shattered plate, then at the 100 pairs of eyes, their community, their neighbors. staring at them. They looked like what they were: two greedy, wealthy bullies, harassing a poor, frail old woman in her place of work. The power flipped. "No," Lena said, her teeth clenched. "No problem. We were just checking on our mother. You come by later," Sam mumbled, pulling at his sister's arm. We'll talk later." They backed out of the restaurant, defeated by my performance. But as the door swung shut, I saw their faces. The confusion was gone. It was replaced by a new, cold, and deeply unfamiliar terror. They had 7 days left. The final day arrived, as all final days do, with a brutal and deeply indifferent punctuality. It was a cold, gray, and drizzly D.C. morning, a perfect day for a funeral, and today was the funeral for the life my children had always known. I was not there to witness the scene. I was in my penthouse, my new home, looking down on the city through a sheet of rain. But Augustine, my dear loyal Augustine, had arranged for a discreet private observer to be present. He gave me a full and deeply satisfying blow-by-blow account. The eviction crew, a team of grim, efficient men in gray uniforms, arrived at the brownstone at precisely 9 a.m. They were not sentimental. They were not judgmental. They were simply there to do a job. Sam and Lena were in a state of pure, chaotic, and deeply undignified panic. Their entire beautiful and deeply historic home was in a state of disarray. A whirlwind of half-packed boxes, overturned furniture, and the general messy detritus of two lives that had just been violently upended. In their arrogance, they had believed until the very last moment that something would happen, that their mother would swoop in and fix it, that this was all just some bizarre, elaborate test. They had not, until the moment the moving truck had actually backed up to their curb, truly believed that she would let this happen. Their fury, I was told, was a magnificent thing to behold. They had screamed at the movers, "You can't do this. This is our home." They had screamed at each other. "This is your fault," Sam had yelled. "You and your underperforming asset." "My fault?" Lena had shrieked. "You agreed. You wanted your celebrity restaurant." And they had, of course, screamed at me into the cold, silent, and deeply unsympathetic ear of my voicemail. I sat on a white silk sofa, sipping my tea, and I looked at the call log on my private phone. 47 missed calls. Sam, Lena, Mark, Lena, Sam, Lena. Block number. My phone buzzed again. A new voicemail. I pressed play. "Where are you?" It was Lena. Her voice was not the cool, controlled instrument of the powerful political wife. It was the raw, ragged, and deeply ugly shriek of a woman who has just lost everything. "What have you done? You've stolen our home. You've stolen our inheritance. You have left us on the street. You monster!" I listened, my expression calm. I let her scream herself hoarse. When all that was left was the sound of her own ragged, gasping sobs, I deleted the message. My phone buzzed again. A text from Augustine. "Assets are on the sidewalk. Movers are departing. New locks are being installed. The Escalade is en route. ETA 5 minutes." I texted back a single word: "Proceed." At around noon, the car arrived. It was not a simple taxi. It was a sleek, black, and deeply intimidating Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows. The kind of vehicle that whispers of quiet, serious, and very, very expensive power. The driver was a large, impassive man in a dark suit who did not speak. He simply opened the rear doors and gestured for them to get in. Sam and Lena, who were sitting on a pile of their own boxed-up belongings on the sidewalk like two beautifully dressed refugees, were in no position to argue. They got into the car, their faces a mixture of confusion, resentment, and a new dawning flicker of fear. They assumed, of course, that they were being taken to Augustine's office for a final humiliating legal lecture. a place where they would be forced to sign papers, to be officially and formally stripped of their birthright. The car, however, did not head towards the old, staid, and deeply traditional legal district of the city. It headed in the opposite direction. It headed downtown, towards the new, glittering, and deeply ambitious heart of the new Washington, D.C. It moved through the bustling, powerful streets, past the gleaming modern headquarters of lobbying firms and tech giants. Sam and Lena stared out the tinted windows, their bickering long since silenced by a cold, new dread. Where is he taking us? Sam stammered. What is that? Lena whispered, her face pale. The car was pulling up in front of a building that was so new, so tall, and so breathtakingly beautiful that it seemed to have been teleported from the future. It was a soaring, 100-story skyscraper of black glass and steel, a magnificent architectural statement of pure, unadulterated power and wealth. It was the newest, most exclusive, and most talked about building in the entire city. And on the polished black granite above the massive revolving doors, in simple, elegant, and deeply understated silver letters, was its name. The Summit Tower. Sam and Lena just stared, their mouths agape. They had, of course, read about this building in the papers. It had been the talk of the city for the past year. A mysterious, anonymous, and incredibly wealthy developer had built a monument that had single-handedly redefined the D.C. skyline. What are we doing here? Sam stammered to the silent, impassive driver. The driver did not answer. He simply got out, opened their doors, and led them into the lobby. The lobby was a cathedral of modern wealth. The ceilings were 50 feet high. The floors were a seamless expanse of polished white marble. The art on the walls was not the dusty, old-fashioned stuff from their mother's house. It was a collection of massive, important-looking modern sculptures and paintings that were worth more than the brownstone they had just been evicted from. A concierge, a tall, elegant woman in a uniform that was sharper and more expensive than their own clothes, greeted them with a cool, professional smile. "Mr. Jennings, Ms. Carter," she said, her voice a low, cultured purr. "We've been expecting you. Right this way." She did not lead them to a normal elevator. She led them to a small, discreet, and deeply exclusive door at the back of the lobby. It opened into a private elevator, its walls lined with dark, polished wood, its keypad requiring a special high-level security clearance. The concierge used her own key card and then pressed a single, glowing button at the very top of the panel, a button marked simply P. The elevator began to ascend. Its movement was so smooth, so silent, that it felt like they were floating. They were rising up, up above the city, above their own small, petty, and now completely ruined lives. They were on their way to a summons, a final and deeply mysterious judgment, and they had no idea who the judge was going to be. The private elevator ascended in a profound and deeply unsettling silence. There was no music, no soft hum of machinery, just the quiet, almost imperceptible sense of rising, of leaving the messy, complicated world of the city streets far, far below. Sam and Lena stood side by side, two strangers united by a shared and deeply confusing dread. The elevator did not ding when it arrived. It simply stopped. The polished wooden doors slid open, not into a hallway, but directly into a space so vast, so beautiful, and so breathtakingly opulent that it seemed to defy the very laws of architecture. They had arrived at the penthouse. It was a 3-story, glass-walled palace in the sky. The living room alone was larger than the entire ground floor of the brownstone they had just been evicted from. The furniture was a collection of sleek, modern masterpieces. The art on the walls was not just art. It was a museum-quality collection of the most important Black artists of the 20th and 21st centuries. A massive, vibrant Jacob Lawrence hung on one wall, a powerful, brooding Romar Bearden on another. But the most staggering thing was the view. The apartment was surrounded on all sides by floor-to-ceiling, 20-foot-high glass walls, offering a complete, uninterrupted, and utterly godlike 360-degree panorama of the entire city. They could see everything. The Capitol dome, gleaming white in the afternoon sun. The sharp, piercing finger of the Washington Monument. The majestic curve of the Potomac River. It was a view of absolute and deeply intimidating power. They stepped out of the elevator as if into a dream, their feet silent on a rug that was so thick and so white it felt like walking on a cloud. The apartment was silent, empty. "Hello?" Sam called out, his voice a small, uncertain sound in the vast, echoing space. And then, from a grand, sweeping glass and steel staircase that seemed to float in the middle of the room, a figure appeared. It was me. I was not the woman they had seen just weeks ago. The woman in the simple, practical dress. The woman whose life they had so casually and so contemptuously dismantled. The woman who descended those stairs was a stranger to them. I was dressed in an exquisitely tailored, cream-colored silk pantsuit, a creation of a designer so exclusive they had probably never even heard of him. My gray hair, which I usually wore in a simple, practical bun, had been styled into a sleek, elegant chignon. My only jewelry was a single, magnificent, and deeply, deeply real South Sea pearl necklace at my throat. I was not their mother. I was not the humble, hard-working owner of a soul food restaurant. I was the queen of this palace, the master of this universe. And I had summoned them here, to my throne room, for a final and deeply satisfying audience. I descended the stairs slowly, my movements calm and regal, my eyes never leaving their shocked, pale, and utterly uncomprehending faces. I stopped on the final step, looking down on them, both literally and metaphorically. They just stared, their mouths agape, their minds a chaotic, short-circuiting jumble of disbelief and a dawning, terrifying, world-shattering understanding. And then I spoke. My voice was not the warm, familiar, and slightly weary voice of their mother. It was the quiet, clear, and utterly unshakable voice of a woman who was, at long last, completely and totally in command. "You told me," I began, my voice a quiet, calm, and deeply resonant thing that filled the vast silent space, that I needed to find my own place. I took the final step down from the staircase and onto the plush white rug. I walked with a slow, deliberate grace to the center of the room, to the very spot where the view of the city was most spectacular. "You told me," I continued, my back to them now, my gaze fixed on the panoramic, godlike view of the city below, that the old house was no longer big enough for all of us, that we didn't fit together there anymore. I turned slowly to face them. They were still frozen by the elevator. Two small, insignificant figures in my vast new world. Their faces were a beautiful and deeply satisfying picture of pure, unadulterated, and mind-breaking shock. "And you were right," I said, a small, cold, and deeply triumphant smile touching my lips. "You were absolutely right. We didn't fit. Your ambitions had grown too large for that small, simple house. And my life," I said, "my real life, had certainly grown too large for it as well." I gestured with a sweep of my hand, a gesture that encompassed the entire breathtaking and deeply, deeply expensive space around them. The art, the furniture, the view. "So," I said, my voice a soft, final, and utterly devastating whisper, "I found my own place." The last, final, and most impossible piece of the puzzle slammed into place in their minds. The mysterious, anonymous developer. The quiet, staggering, and deeply untraceable wealth. the Summit Tower, their mother, my mother, Martha, the woman who made the best damn fried chicken in all of DC. She had not just built a restaurant, she had built this. Sam made a small choking sound, as if he were trying to swallow his own tongue. Lena's face, which had been pale with shock, was now flushed with a new, dawning, and deeply humiliating horror. The full, catastrophic scope of their miscalculation, of their profound and deeply arrogant underestimation of their own mother, was now laid bare. They had been fighting over a cracker, while I had been sitting on a feast. They had been trying to steal a rowboat, while I had been secretly captaining a battleship. They had looked at their mother their entire lives, and they had seen a small, simple, and slightly embarrassing woman. They had never once, in their wildest, most arrogant dreams, imagined that she was a queen, and that this entire glittering and deeply powerful city was her kingdom. They stood there in the doorway of my new life, two statues of pure, unadulterated shock, the world they had known, the world where they were the ambitious, forward-thinking children and I was the simple, old-fashioned mother, had been completely and utterly annihilated. How? Lena finally managed to whisper, her voice a raw, broken thing. How is this possible? I gave her a long, quiet, and deeply sorrowful look. It's possible, Lena, I said, my voice no longer cold, but now tinged with a deep and very real sadness for the children I had lost. Because while you and your brother were busy being ashamed of my work, I was busy working. While you were complaining about the dust on your inheritance, I was busy building one. I walked over to the vast glass wall and looked down at the city. My city. You saw the restaurant as a cage, I said, more to myself than to them. A small, greasy, and deeply embarrassing cage. To me, it was a foundation of hard work, of real value, of a community that I loved and that loved me back. And I used that foundation, I said, turning back to face them, my voice now a quiet, powerful testament to a life they had never seen. To build all of this, I gestured again to the palace around them, to the glittering, powerful city outside. Every brick in this building, I said, my voice cutting through the shock. Every pane of glass, every single solitary dollar of the $100 million it took to build it, was earned with the profits from that greasy spoon you so profoundly despised. The final devastating truth of it, the sheer poetic justice of it, was a thing of almost biblical power. The very thing they had been ashamed of, the source of their lifelong resentment, had been the secret silent engine of the very wealth and power they had so desperately craved. They had no words. What could they possibly say? You wanted your inheritance, I said, my voice a soft final whisper. I looked at their stunned, horrified faces, and I felt not triumph, not anger, but a deep and very real pity. This is it. I gestured to the vast floor-to-ceiling windows, to the breathtaking panoramic view of the city. Your inheritance, I said, my voice a quiet and utterly final judgment, is a view. A perfect, beautiful, and deeply, deeply expensive view. A view of everything you could have had, if you had just for one single moment seen your own mother for who she truly was. I turned my back on them then. A final, quiet, and deeply symbolic dismissal. You were right, I said, my gaze once again fixed on the horizon, on the future, on my new, quiet, and deeply powerful life. We didn't fit together in that little house anymore. Now, if you'll excuse me, I said, as I heard the private elevator doors behind me quietly open, summoned by my silent command. I have a city to run. I did not have to hear them leave. I did not have to watch as they stumbled back into the elevator, back down to the world of the small and the petty and the broken. I just stood there, In my new home, in my new life, a queen in her castle, at long last, completely and totally at peace. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.